Jinnah very much begins as a very secular person, etc., in the 1910s. When Gandhi arrives and Gandhi begins bringing in a much more Hindu ideas into the Congress, Jinnah is horrified by this.
So how exactly did Jinnah go from a secular freedom fighter to the man who founded Pakistan on the basis of religion?
Jinnah is a prime example of someone who changes quite dramatically over time. And I think this is important because the Jinnah of 1910s, he is arguably one of the most important Congress leaders. And he is arguably the one who most Indians perceived to be the leading freedom fighter. And of course, today, when you see the kind of, lists of all the freedom fighters who helped gain India freedom, you never see Jinnah there. But if you were to ask anyone in the 1910s or 20s who would be the number one person, it wouldn't be Gandhi, it would be Jinnah. Now, this begins to change for a variety of reasons. One, which I talk about quite extensively in the book, is to do with his marriage. He marries a Parsi woman called Rati, who converts to Islam for the marriage to happen. It's illegal for him to marry her otherwise at the time. And she's very young. She, as a result of this marriage, is excommunicated from her community and never allowed to set foot in her family home again. And I think that Jinnah earlier had seen interfaith marriages as quite an important glue in bringing Indians of all classes and castes and backgrounds together. Yet in the wake of his wife being excommunicated, he begins to become disillusioned with this. Now, the other thing is when Gandhi arrives and Gandhi begins bringing in a much more Hindu ideas into the Congress, Jinnah is horrified by this. And he explicitly talks about being horrified by the way that religion is brought into politics. Now, of course, we know now that 20 years later, he is going to found a nation state on the basis of religion. But the Jinnah of the 20s would never have even considered this. I think the other thing that we often forget is that he was, in his early years at least, very much focused on essentially guarding the rights of India's Muslim minority, which was still the largest Muslim population on the planet. We forget that in the 1920s, India had a larger Muslim population than the entire Arab world put together, because it had the Muslim populations of India, Pakistan, and Bangladesh, and the entirety of the Persian Gulf. I think it's around the time of the Nehru report, when they're debating reservations for Muslims in Indian parliament, basically. And Jinnah's saying that they should have 1/3 of all seats, because Muslims are 1/3 of the Indian nation. And then suddenly he has to leave because his estranged wife, Rati, is found in a coma in Paris, having had a drug overdose, something like that. And he leaves, and when he comes back to India, he finds that Nehru has done away with all the reservations that he'd been fighting for. And he'd used Jinnah's absence in order to push these reforms through so that Muslims did not have the reservations that Jinnah had been seeking. And I think that Jinnah took this incredibly personally. Now, it's very important to remember that when he first puts forward the Pakistan demand, until about 1946, a lot of people have debated, was it a bargaining chip? But I think that that's missing the point, because I think what he's actually probably arguing for is something quite similar to Britain's solution for Britain has within it England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland. And these are understood as separate nations within a singular framework for one nation state. And the fact that Jinnah accepts the cabinet mission plan in 1946, saying that he's willing to accept Pakistan if it's one federal piece within a larger India, I think shows that that's what he was trying to push for initially. Yet in the wake of basically Gandhi and Nehru turning down that idea, that is actually when Jinnah begins calling for a completely separate nation state. And it's in the wake of the massacres of Direct Action Day that all conversation between him and the Congress leaders breaks down. And I think that the violence and the borders become inevitable. And I think it's quite telling that his daughter remained an Indian citizen. She did not migrate to Pakistan. She remained living in Bombay through the end of her days. And he kept his house in Bombay. He tried to keep it, he never sold his house. He always thought that these borders would not necessarily become as crystallized and as hardened as they have subsequently.